It was June 17th, 2009 at 5:42 in the morning. I can vividly remember the day and the time because that morning I was especially frazzled and a little irritated that I was already 12 minutes behind my morning schedule, which meant I was going to be late again. So I raced out of my front door. I rushed to strap in my 2-year-old, 3-year-old, and my 5-year-old into their car seats, jumped in the car, started the ignition, put the gear into reverse, and stepped on the gas pedal, only to hear a loud boom. In all of my chaotic and frantic rushing, I had forgotten just that quickly that my husband had just pulled his brand new car directly behind mine. I could not believe I had just done that. I held my head down low, I let out this sigh of disgust, and I put my gear back into park and just sat there behind the steering wheel. And as I sat there, I could feel these emotions starting to stir inside of me. Emotions of discouragement, disappointment, frustration, and even some sadness. And then I could feel the tears starting to well up in my eyes. And eventually those tears started to stream down my face uncontrollably. Now the tears and the emotions that I felt in that moment, they weren't just a reflection of what had just happened. It was much deeper than that. Those tears and those emotions were a reflection of the fact that I knew I was no longer living life. I was just existing in it. I was on autopilot. I had a great sense of frustration that I wasn't living to my fullest potential, wasn't walking in purpose. Instead, every day my life felt chaotic and rushed. I was always rushing to drop the kids off, or rushing to pick the kids up, or racing off to the full-time job that I worked that paid the bills but didn't make me feel nurtured inside, didn't make me feel like I was doing the thing I was supposed to be doing. I was sick and tired of being sick and tired. I wanted something different. I wanted to be that woman who wakes up in the morning and you're excited and energized about what you get to do. I wanted time freedom and financial freedom. I wanted to be able to tap into my God-given gifts and use that to impact the lives of other girls and women all around the world. I wanted to create legacy, that thing that you pass down to someone else, the thing that long outlives your physical body. And most importantly, I wanted to be a model for my 3 children of what it looked like to find the thing you know you are born to do and to do it without regrets and without apologies. As I sat there, eventually those tears that were once streaming down my face dried up. And the emotions that I initially felt now became a new emotion, anger. And for the first time in my life, I gave myself permission to feel that anger, to be fully in it, to sit in it and embrace it. Now, I had never done that before because all of my life I was taught to run from anger, to shun it at all costs, especially as a Black woman. Growing up, I watched my mother, my grandmother, my aunts all go out of their way to abandon being labeled as angry at all costs. But for me in that moment, the anger that I felt made me feel empowered. No other emotion had ever made me feel that way. I felt this internal drive, a push, and a motivation like, Cheryl, now's the time for you to do something different so that you can experience something different. That anger in that moment made me want to disrupt my norm so that I could create a life that I was in love with. So yes, in that moment, in 2009, I was an angry Black woman, and I did not apologize for it. I was unashamed about being angry. Now, I understand that all of us have our own perspective and viewpoint of what that phrase really represents. Most times, people hear that phrase and they automatically associate it with a Black woman who's hostile, aggressive, rageful, even confrontational. I've even heard people say statements like, I can't wait for the day when a woman like Senator Kamala Harris can show up as her full self without the fear of being labeled as an angry Black woman. So the reality is it has a negative connotation. Most times people associate it with something that's toxic and destructive, even harmful. But for purposes of our time together today, I want us to be intentional about reframing the narrative around what that phrase really represents. I want us to go on a journey together of realizing that being angry as a woman doesn't have to be a bad thing. It can be a bold, beautiful, badass thing. Just imagine the possibility that anger can actually be the catalyst for women stepping out boldly and courageously to pursue the things that they love to do. Consider the possibility that anger can actually be productive and constructive, constructive and productive instead of destructive, and instead of harmful or toxic. Imagine the possibility of anger being the very emotion that we shun, but should be the emotion that we embrace, because it allows us to get out into the world and demand what we want instead of hoping the world gives us what we deserve. After all, in my own experience, what I've witnessed is that when a woman gets angry enough, she typically steps into action to create change. That's exactly what happened to me in that day on 2009. I literally took all the anger I had been experiencing in that moment and I channeled it into passionate movement. I allowed my anger to become fuel for who I was going to become. I started thinking bigger. I started visualizing a different reality in that moment. I started thinking about goals that could become possibilities that ultimately could manifest into realities. Zig Ziglar says, to reach a goal, you have to see the reaching in your own mind before you ever arrive at the goal. So anger for me was very productive. It was something that became one of my greatest assets from that day forward. I started thinking bigger. I started dreaming bigger. I started visualizing and seeing a reaching in my own mind of a new reality, a reality that I would be in love with. And the start all began with me dismantling everything I had ever been taught about how anger shows up, how it looks, how it behaves, and instead creating a new reality about anger and how it shows up and looks and behaves. That propelled me to do something I had never done before. Anger gave me this momentum to succeed and to thrive. So I started a business. I started my own speaking and coaching business, which was completely outside of my norm. But that was the beautiful thing about anger. It became my loudest voice of reason to say, Cheryl, go for it. Take the risk. Do what scares you. Get outside of your comfort zone. And I decided that from that moment forward, I was going to leverage anger as one of my greatest assets. So when I launched that speaking and coaching business, I allowed anger to come along with me for the ride. I remember about a year and a half or so into my business, I got angry that I wasn't generating the level of profits that I knew I had the potential to generate. I was serving the world at a high level, but my bank account was not reflective of my level of service. That made me angry. Well, that anger allowed me to align myself with the actions that would create change and transformation. So I took action. I hired a coach who could teach me how to sell, a coach who could teach me the power of persuasive languaging so that I could magnetize clients in who would be willing to invest at a higher level. That resulted in me increasing my rates and charging what I was worth without guilt. A few years later, after I'd become profitable in my business and I started traveling the world speaking into the lives of women, I got angry that I still wasn't being invited to certain tables. You know those right tables that we really want to be invited to? And honestly, that made me angry. But once again, anger became my voice of reason to say, Cheryl, why are you waiting on someone to extend an invitation for you to come to their table when you have everything it takes to create the table? Anger was giving me this drive and this motivation to do things I had never done before. And that's what I did that moment. I started creating my own tables and inviting other amazing women and boss leaders in to connect, to collaborate, and to grow together. So in every situation for me, especially in my business, anger was the thing that became productive and constructive, that catapulted me into my next level, elevation. And as I consistently started to experience these results, I wanted to duplicate it. So I created a 3-part solution so that I could rinse and repeat it and keep getting these amazing results based on anger. And that 3-part solution is to analyze, acknowledge, and act on your anger. And as I implemented that, eventually I got to walk away from that corporate job that paid the bills but I didn't love and walked into my full-time passion as a speaker and as a coach, impacting the lives of women all around the world. As I kept getting these results and literally watched the trajectory of my life start to shift, I wondered, could this work for other women? After all, Maya Angelou says, each time a woman stands up for herself, without knowing it and possibly without claiming it, she stands up for all women. And I wanted to stand up for all women. So I started taking this message about adopting anger and leveraging it, maximizing it. I started taking it to women's groups and conferences and organizations and companies all over the world to introduce them to this concept of not abandoning anger, not running from it, but leveraging it, maximizing it, using it not only to propel them into setting new goals, but also to crossing the finish line of achieving those goals. What was the result? Hundreds of the women that I partnered with, they started launching these powerful messages, missions, and movements. Many of them started writing best-selling international books. They started taking international stages and sharing their stories. They started creating global brands that allowed them to touch other people with their unique fingerprint. That is what I was born to do. That's what I wanted to continue to do. So today I offer to you the three-part solution that has catapulted me into a new level of elevation and many of the women I've had the opportunity to serve. First, analyze. To analyze is to carefully examine or even dissect something. Give yourself permission to carefully analyze your anger and do it without bias. Give yourself permission to get to the root of your anger. What are the underlying emotions that's causing that anger to rise to the top? And then examine your options for maximizing the anger instead of just harboring it or suppressing it as a bad or harmful emotion. And give yourself permission even to launch a powerful message, mission, or movement that's going to transform your life and the lives of others as a result of your anger. Second, acknowledge. To acknowledge something is simply to the existence of a matter. So acknowledge that anger is a normal human emotion that every race and every gender experiences, and that you are not some awful person just because you get angry. In fact, maybe now is the time for you to get angry. Angry that perhaps you're playing smaller than your potential. Angry that perhaps you're still sitting on the book that you know is inside of you that you should have written already. Maybe now is the time for you to get angry that you are playing smaller and you're dimming your light to make somebody else comfortable, or that you haven't launched the business. Whatever the thing is, give yourself permission to embrace, to validate, and then to act based on your anger. And third, act. Create a constructive plan of action for your anger. Decide how you want to laser focus and channel that anger into something greater, into something profound that impacts other people's lives. And then take steps every single day to move towards whatever the desired result is that you have created in your mind. Because remember, you have to visualize it before you can achieve it. I believe every woman, regardless of race, has at least a small dose of angry black woman inside of her that can serve as fuel and momentum for who she's becoming, for her being able to become the greatest version of herself. So, if you're a black woman, I challenge you from this moment forward not to ever allow anybody else to demean you or diminish you or make you feel less than simply because they use that phrase, angry black woman. Instead, claim your power over it. Wear it as a badge of honor. Own it, and hold your head up high. And give yourself permission to validate every emotion that you experience as a woman, yes, anger included. If you're a woman of any other race other than a black woman, I challenge you to examine your perspective of what that phrase really means and represents, and then link arms with us to help us to reframe the narrative around it, so that all of us as women are proud that we are boldly, courageously using our anger to impact lives, to create new initiatives, and to create change in the world. I challenge every woman to be very intentional about maximizing your anger so that you can become the greatest version of yourself. And the next time you see a black woman or any woman who you think is angry, applaud her, celebrate her, support her, maybe even join her, and realize that she's probably up to something positively explosive that is about to change the world and transform lives. Thank you.